On October 26, 1965, the Indianapolis police received an emergency call to respond to an incident that happened at a residence situated at the intersection of East New York Street and North Denny Street. Officer Melvin Dixon promptly arrived at the scene, where he was presented the lifeless body of a teenage girl named Sylvia Likens. The person responsible for Sylvia's care, who identified herself as Gertrude Baniszewski, informed Officer Dixon that Sylvia had been a troublemaker, often attending wild parties with boys. According to Gertrude, Sylvia had left the previous night with a group of juvenile delinquent boys who allegedly assaulted and beat her before dumping her back on the lawn of her house. Gertrude claimed to have discovered Sylvia in a half-naked and severely beaten state, attempting to provide care until Sylvia succumbed to her injuries. Gertrude mentioned that, before her demise, Sylvia had handed her a letter addressed to her parents. In the letter, Sylvia supposedly detailed the events of the previous night, confessing to being a problem for her caregiver, Gertrude. Without questioning the strangely specific nature of this deft confession, Officer Dixon accepted Gertrude's story. This story was further supported by others in the household, including Sylvia's sister Jenny, leaving Officer Dixon with little alternative but to reach out to the coroner. About an hour later, when the doctor arrived to examine the body, preparations were made to transport it to the coroner's office. As the police were preparing to depart, Jenny discreetly approached one of the officers, tugging on his sleeve and whispering, "Get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." Hello, and welcome to Maya's reality channel, where we bring you compelling true crime stories. From unsolved mysteries to notorious criminals, we leave no stone unturned as we navigate the dark corridors of real-life crimes. Now let's get back to the story. Gertrude Baniszewski. Gertrude Baniszewski, born Gertrude Van Fossen on September 22, 1929, in Indianapolis, Indiana, was the third of 6 children born to Hugh and Molly Van Fossen. Despite the affection her mother showered on her other siblings, Gertrude experienced disapproval from Molly and her brothers and sisters. Unsubstantiated rumors added to the tension, implying that Gertrude was the favored child of her father, escalating the discord within the family. At the tender age of 11, tragedy struck when Gertrude's father, Hugh, suffered a sudden and fatal heart attack while reading with her. Although the incident was unrelated to Gertrude, Molly's grief transformed into anger directed at her daughter. While Molly consoled her other children, Gertrude encountered her mother's wrath whenever she sought comfort after a nightmare. The hostile atmosphere extended beyond the confines of their home, as Gertrude's siblings joined in instigating attacks from fellow students at school. Molly also played a part in the torment by spreading damaging rumors about Gertrude. This relentless bullying contributed to Gertrude's growing bitterness towards other women, setting the stage for tragic consequences later in her life. Desperate for an escape, Gertrude married John Baniszewski, an 18-year-old police officer, at the age of 16. However, marital life was challenging for Gertrude, who lacked guidance on self-care. Working as a clerk at a drugstore, she struggled with domestic responsibilities, creating tension in her marriage. After 3 years of marriage, Gertrude welcomed her first child, Hala, followed by Stephanie 2 years later. Juggling the demands of motherhood became increasingly difficult, and Gertrude's upbringing left her ill-prepared for the challenges. A nervous breakdown occurred after Stephanie's birth, leading to a diagnosis of neuroticism, an illness closely related to bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. Determined not to repeat her mother's mistakes, Gertrude worked diligently to be a loving and attentive parent. Despite facing mental health challenges, she welcomed John Jr. and another daughter named Marie into the family. The journey ahead would prove to be tumultuous for Gertrude Van Fossen and her efforts to break free from the painful cycle of her past. At this point, all of Gertrude's attention was centered on her children, and her husband felt neglected. She was constantly nagging John about his drinking habits and finances. Their relationship turned toxic, and he became physically abusive. Though Gertrude hid her bruises for a while, in 1955, she mustered the courage to express her desire for a divorce, a decision John readily embraced. Now alone with 4 kids, Gertrude swiftly found herself in another marriage, this time to Edward Guthrie. Edward, unemployed at the time, seemed more attracted to Gertrude's child support payments than to her. His interest in her children appeared superficial, and the marriage soured quickly. Once Edward secured a job and could live without Gertrude's financial support, he initiated divorce proceedings, ending their brief union. Managing with payment from child support and odd jobs, Gertrude faced the stigma of being the single mother in a less understanding society. Presented with an opportunity to reconcile with John Sr., she seized it, leading to their remarriage. Gertrude worked tirelessly to keep her husband content, but tragedy struck when she suffered a miscarriage close to the baby's full term, plunging her into a deep depression. John's response to her depression was not understanding. Instead, he saw it as neglect of their children and home. Attempting to address the issue, he resorted to violence, but unsurprisingly, it did not alleviate her depression. Upon becoming pregnant again, Gertrude seemed to revert to her previous self, and the abuse ceased. The cycle repeated with more miscarriages over the 7 years of their marriage. Gertrude did have 2 more children, their 4th daughter Shirley, and a son named James. However, John grew weary of the emotional roller coaster and filed for divorce once again, leaving Gertrude alone with 6 children to care for. The tumultuous pattern of her relationships had a profound impact on Gertrude's life and the challenges she faced as a mother. Around this period, reports emerged that Gertrude began physically abusing her children. In her 30s, alone and barely surviving on child support, her mental health deteriorated after numerous miscarriages and 3 failed marriages. Facing eviction from her house, she initiated an affair with a 27-year-old married man named Dennis Wright. When Dennis's wife left him, Gertrude and her 6 children swiftly moved into his house, where Dennis became the sole provider. The household descended into disarray, with Gertrude neglecting to clean up after herself or her children. Despite complaints from Dennis, Gertrude used sex as a means to keep him complacent. Dennis, contemplating ending the relationship, returned home one day to find an immaculate house and a home-cooked meal. After a night of intimacy, Gertrude broached the subject of marriage. However, Dennis, still married and financially constrained, expressed his inability to afford a divorce. Gertrude then claimed she believed she was pregnant, hoping to secure a commitment from Dennis. Unwilling to have more children, especially with Gertrude, Dennis reacted violently upon realizing the possibility of a 7th child. He punched her in the face and repeatedly in the stomach, resulting in a miscarriage. Despite the unhappiness, they remained together, openly acknowledging their discontent. Dennis continued engaging in unprotected sex with Gertrude, leading to another pregnancy. This time, Gertrude delayed informing Dennis until she was further along. Surprisingly, he did not react angrily, seemingly accepting the news. However, upon returning from the hospital after giving birth, Gertrude discovered that Dennis had abandoned her. Gertrude was left alone in the house with her children, including Dennis Jr., the 7th and last child she would have. The betrayal took a toll on Gertrude, leading her to stop eating and transform from a relatively attractive woman into a sickly, skeletal figure within weeks. Her health deteriorated further due to constant chain smoking. To conceal the illegitimacy of Dennis Jr., Gertrude adopted Dennis's last name and became known as Gertrude Wright, claiming that her husband was away in the army, despite never having married Dennis Sr. The aftermath of this tumultuous relationship left Gertrude in a state of physical and emotional decline. During this time, John was failing to meet his child support obligations, forcing Gertrude to take on additional responsibilities. She started doing chores for her neighbors to help cover the bills, including regular babysitting. As Gertrude's life took a downward turn, her eldest daughter, Paula, assumed the role of the head of the household. The house transformed into a popular gathering spot for other youths, offering a space to smoke and listen to music without parental interference. In the midst of her challenges, Gertrude discovered solace in the company of these young teens, adopting the persona of the cool mom in their perception. The household dynamic underwent a transformation as Gertrude started relishing the camaraderie within the youthful environment, offering a brief respite from the difficulties she was confronting. Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens, born on January 3, 1949, in Lebanon, Indiana, was the middle child in her family. She had two older siblings, Daniel and Diana, and two younger ones, Benny and Jenny. Jenny, her younger sister, had a tough start as she got polio as a baby, which left one of her legs weaker, needing a brace. Sylvia's parents, Lester and Betty Likens, worked at carnivals, selling candy and soda. When they traveled for work, Sylvia and Jenny usually stayed with their grandmother. In July 1965, Betty suddenly decided to leave Lester, and Sylvia and Jenny had to pack up and leave. They took a bus to Indianapolis, hoping to start a new life. However, things took a turn when Betty got caught shoplifting, and Sylvia and Jenny were left on their own with only $2. They wandered around town, but their mother never returned. Eventually, they met Darling McGuire, a friend who introduced them to Paula Baniszewski. Paula asked Gertrude if the girls could stay for dinner, and Gertrude allowed only Jenny initially. Jenny insisted on staying with her sister, and eventually Gertrude agreed to let both girls stay for the night. Around midnight, Lester arrived with his son Daniel, hoping to find Betty and invite her to a new carnival job. However, the girls told him about Betty's arrest, and Lester, deciding to leave for his job, mentioned they would be going to stay with their grandmother. Gertrude offered to let them stay with her instead, given their friendship with her kids and the convenience of staying in the same neighborhood. Lester arranged for Sylvia and Jenny to live with Gertrude Baniszewski, agreeing to pay $20 a week until he returned in November. Little did they know, this decision would lead to a tragic chapter in Sylvia Likens' life. After July 4th, Jenny and Sylvia moved into 3850 East New York Street as their family traveled for the carnival. In the beginning, life with the Baniszewski family was okay, with little discipline or abuse. Sylvia got along with Stephanie, sang to pop records, and helped with housework. Both sisters attended Sunday school with the Baniszewski children, and the pastor even praised Sylvia's devotion. However, the harmonious arrangement quickly deteriorated as the household has now expanded to 9 children with only 1 adult. The lack of beds, the absence of a stove, and insufficient silverware forced them to share a single spoon. Sylvia continued to help with chores, but when Lester's next $20 payment didn't arrive on time, Gertrude slapped both girls, stating that she'd taken care of them for a week of nothing. However, when the money order arrived the next day, Gertrude wouldn't apologize. During a visit from Lester and Betty the following week, the girls didn't mention the abuse. Physical punishment was more commonplace at the time, and Sylvia and Jenny might not have perceived it as out of line. It's even said that Lester had advised Gertrude to be strict with them when he initially left them in her care. After the short visit, Lester gave Gertrude another $20, and they left. One day at the park, Sylvia and Jenny collected empty soda bottles for a small amount of money, enough to buy candy. Upon returning to the Baniszewski home, they shared some candy with the other children. When Gertrude learned of this, she accused them of stealing and subjected both sisters to a beating. Using a wooden paddle, the punishment began on the buttocks, but escalated to the back, and even the back of the head. At times, when Gertrude felt too weak, she had her daughter Paula administer the beatings. Shockingly, Paula didn't hesitate to abuse the girls, even openly bragging at church on August 1st about a broken wrist, proudly claiming it was from punching Sylvia in the face. The once promising living situation had devolved into a nightmare of physical abuse and cruelty for Sylvia Likens. Sylvia faced further abuse when Gertrude accused her, without evidence, of stealing $10. The lack of food in the house meant that Sylvia and Jenny were often the first to go without. The Baniszewski children ate first, and if Sylvia found a scrap of leftover food, she would be punished. On one occasion, after attending a church dinner, Paula claimed that Sylvia and Jenny ate too much, leading to their being stripped and beaten upon returning home. Gertrude's obsession with controlling Sylvia extended to any form of generosity or kindness shown by others. At another time, Gertrude punished the girls upon learning that their older sister Diana bought them a sandwich when she visited 2 months ago. Food became a tool of torture as well, with Gertrude, Paula, and a neighbor boy, Randy, forcing Sylvia to eat a hot dog overloaded with condiments and spices. When Sylvia resisted, Gertrude shoved the hot dog into her mouth, causing her to vomit. Insistent that Sylvia would eat the entire hot dog, Gertrude forced her to eat her own vomit off the filthy kitchen floor, while Paula and Randy laughed. As the summer progressed, the focus of abuse shifted almost entirely to Sylvia, though Jenny wasn't entirely spared from physical punishment. Sylvia became the primary target of Gertrude's violence, making her the subject of everyone's hostility. Upon attending Arsenal Technical High School, Paula, Stephanie, and Sylvia obtained student jobs in the cafeteria, providing them with free lunches. For Sylvia, it sometimes became her only meal of the day. A minor lapse in judgment when Sylvia started a rumor at school about the Baniszewski girls being cheap for sex. This escalated her constant abuse into full-blown torture. Bitterness over continual abuse led Sylvia to believe she could also dish out cruelty. One time when a boy asked Stephanie how much she charged for sex, she immediately found Sylvia and punched her in the face. Stephanie, one of the few Baniszewskis who didn't enjoy hurting Sylvia, later apologized, highlighting one of the rare moments when someone in the Baniszewski house showed a hint of kindness towards Sylvia. Nevertheless, Stephanie's boyfriend, Coy Hubbard, didn't refrain from confronting Sylvia and subjecting her to a physical assault. When Gertrude also found out about it, she subjected Sylvia to several beatings, this time with a large leather belt. This brutal treatment was followed by a horrifying episode where Gertrude held lit matches against Sylvia's fingers. As Sylvia's appearance deteriorated due to bruises and malnutrition, she eventually stopped attending school. The noticeable signs of abuse and her frailty prompted friends to inquire about her whereabouts when they visited the house. Gertrude, however, responded with lies aimed at fueling hatred towards Sylvia. For instance, she told 13-year-old Anna Sisko that Sylvia had made derogatory remarks about Anna's mother engaging with various men for $5. In a disturbing turn of events, when Sylvia appeared at the door, Anna attacked her, slapping and kicking her. Despite attempts by other kids to intervene, Gertrude stopped them, callously saying, "Let them fight their own fight." Sylvia likely had no understanding of why Anna was attacking her. Gertrude systematically escalated the abuse, involving not only her own children, but also other kids from the neighborhood. The progression ranged from teasing to light abuse and eventually severe abuse. The mob mentality prevailed, preventing anyone from questioning the cruelty unfolding before them. Fueled by any rumor suggesting Sylvia had spoken ill of them, the attackers would launch an assault. Paula, in particular, resorted to hitting Sylvia in the head with any available object. Gertrude, spiraling deeper into her cruelty, started blaming Sylvia for her own medical problems, ludicrously asserting that Sylvia's existence was the cause of her escalating medical bills, conveniently ignoring the impact of her smoking habit. In mid-September, Paula forcibly dragged Sylvia to the back door of the house, instructing her to leave and stay away for her own safety. Sylvia, with nowhere else to go, reluctantly stayed, unaware that this moment marked the only semblance of mercy Paula would ever extend to her. Little did Sylvia know that this event signaled the ominous beginning of the end for her, and had she foreseen the impending horrors, she might have chosen a different path. In early October, Lester and Betty returned to Indianapolis to visit their daughters, Sylvia and Jenny. Even though the girls didn't disclose the abuse they were facing, they did mention their hunger. The parents treated them to sodas, gave Gertrude an additional $20, and provided money for Sylvia to buy new shoes. The Likens were heading to work at a carnival in Florida and planned to return permanently in 3 weeks. Unfortunately, this delay would have fatal consequences for Sylvia. By October, Sylvia's malnourished state had become critical, hindering the healing of her wounds. A concerned neighbor noticed her searching through the trash for food, a heartbreaking indication of the extent of her suffering. After scavenging for food in the trash, Sylvia attempted to sneak back into the house but was caught by Gertrude, who was accompanied by several young boys. Holding an empty glass soda bottle, Gertrude instructed Sylvia to undress, called her a whore, and ordered her to show her sister what kind of person she was. Later, Sylvia was forced to use the bottle on herself, while the boys in the living room cheered with excitement as she reluctantly complied. Dissatisfied with the pace, Gertrude smacked the bottom of the bottle until it couldn't go any further inside, causing Sylvia to scream in pain. Upon hearing this, Stephanie rushed into the living room to intervene. She forcefully pulled the bottle out, revealing a significant amount of blood. Not long after, a new couple, Phyllis Vermillion and her husband, moved in next door. Phyllis, in search of a babysitter, visited the Baniszewski's home and was shocked to find Sylvia emaciated with a black eye. When she inquired about it, Gertrude callously ordered her to go to her room and openly admitted to being the one who had given Sylvia the black eye. Despite this alarming encounter, Phyllis found an alternative babysitter but remained friendly with Gertrude, whom she only knew as Miss Wright. When Phyllis returned a week later, she witnessed Sylvia in an even worse state, and Paula dismissed her as nothing but trouble. Gertrude spun a false narrative, claiming Sylvia had been associating with older men and was believed to be pregnant. Although Phyllis may have been concerned for Sylvia's safety, she took no action to report it. Another neighborhood mother had reported Sylvia's injuries to the local health authority, but when a nurse visited the Baniszewski's home, Gertrude concocted a story, asserting that Sylvia had been involved in prostitution, leading her to kick Sylvia out of the house. In reality, Sylvia was confined to the basement, which had become her regular bedroom. Gertrude deemed her unclean, compelling her children to give Sylvia scalding baths every other night, depriving her of food and water. Gertrude escalated the brutality, putting cigarettes out on Sylvia, tossing lit matches at her, and even rubbing salt into her wounds. To rationalize their cruelty, Gertrude orchestrated a forced confession from Sylvia, instructing her to write a letter to her parents, confessing to causing problems for her caretaker. Weak and hungry, Sylvia likely complied without resistance or concern. In another grotesque incident, when Sylvia complained of hunger, Gertrude instructed her son, John Jr., to feed her the contents of a soiled diaper. He complied, forcing the feces into her mouth and giving her a cup of water. The next day, the cup was refilled with urine. On October 22nd, Sylvia was given a small bowl of soup, with the cruel condition that she could only use her fingers to eat it. That night, Sylvia was tied to a bed and sternly ordered not to wet herself. However, the beatings she had endured had damaged her kidneys, rendering her virtually incontinent. When morning came, it was revealed that she had wet the bed. Gertrude determined that Sylvia needed more severe beatings. At some point during Sylvia and Jenny's stay at the Baniszewskis, a 14-year-old neighbor boy named Richard Hobbs started regularly showing up at the house. Strangely, he was never recognized as a friend of the other children. Later, when questioned by the police, he asserted that he was friends with Gertrude. Rick's mother was battling terminal cancer, and his father was often away at work. Seeking companionship, Rick gravitated towards Gertrude. It's unknown if anything inappropriate happened between them, beyond her once performing striptease for him. However, that seemed to be enough to make him compliant and willing to do anything she wanted. In late October, Gertrude instructed Rick to put a tattoo on Sylvia. She handed him a needle and instructed him to carve, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," into Sylvia's stomach. Sylvia, weakened and dehydrated, was so frail that she didn't even cry out in pain. Despite the ongoing abuse, neither Sylvia nor Jenny disclosed the horrors to their parents during their visits. Jenny later testified that they were too terrified. Fearing that nobody would believe them, and that they would face more abuse from Gertrude after their parents left again. However, they harbored hopes that once their parents returned for good, they would gather the courage to reveal the truth. The wounds and branding inflicted upon Sylvia would serve as evidence supporting their claims. Even in the 1960s, Sylvia's severe abuse was glaringly evident. Gertrude, realizing that Sylvia's death was inevitable, seemed to delay the tragic event, possibly to devise a plan to dispose of her completely. On October 24th, Sylvia made a desperate attempt to escape the house, but her weakened state allowed Gertrude to easily bring her back inside from the porch. In an effort to prolong the inevitable, Gertrude placed Sylvia in the kitchen, attempting to feed her. However, Sylvia, with a swollen mouth, could not consume the toast, leading to frustration. In response, Gertrude ruthlessly beat Sylvia across the face with a metal curtain rod until it got bent. The following day, Jenny tried to feed her sister, and Sylvia's imminent death prompted Gertrude's children to assist in cleaning her up. This involved pouring laundry detergent over Sylvia's body and spraying her down with a garden hose. However, when Stephanie arrived home, she decided to give Sylvia a proper bath. Despite her efforts, Stephanie couldn't get Sylvia upstairs. Rick, noticing Sylvia's critical condition, assisted in getting her into a warm bath. After the bath, they wrapped Sylvia in a towel and placed her on the bed. Gertrude, however, stormed in, accusing Sylvia of faking her condition, and threw a book at her head. Stephanie intervened, firmly telling her mother to leave, and with Rick's assistance, they managed to push Gertrude out of the door. At this point, Sylvia looked up at Stephanie and uttered her last words, saying, "Stephanie, take me home." This statement marked the sad moment when Sylvia Likens took her last breath. Rick attempted to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but the months of horrifying abuse had taken their toll, and Sylvia's suffering was finally over. Without a phone at the Baniszewski residence, Rick hurried to a gas station to call the police. Officer Dixon was the first to respond, arriving at the scene where he was initially presented with a false narrative. The fabricated story painted Sylvia as promiscuous, alleging a night out with a troublesome group. The notion that the seemingly small woman before him could have tortured a teenage girl to death seemed improbable to Officer Dixon at first. However, when Jenny pleaded for help in exchange for revealing the truth, authorities began to doubt Gertrude's account. Investigation. The police started their investigation with the examination of a letter, which read, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Likens, I went with a gang of boys in the middle of the night, and they said that they would pay me if I would give them something, so I got in the car. And they all got what they wanted. And they did, and when they got finished, they beat me up and left sores on my face and all over my body, and they also put on my stomach. I am a prostitute and proud of it. I have done just about everything that I could do just to make Gertrude mad and cause Gertie more money than she's got. I've tore up a new mattress and peed on it. I have also cost Gertie doctor bills that she really can't pay and made Gertie a nervous wreck and all of her kids. I cost her $35 for a hospital in one day, and I wouldn't do anything around the house. I have done anything to do things to make things out of the way to make things worse for them." Sylvia painstakingly documented the narrative as Gertrude dictated it to her, however, with some inaccuracies stemming from her weakened state. The letter's complexities raised suspicions. Why would Sylvia address it to Mr. and Mrs. Likens? The timeline presented seemed inconsistent. She supposedly endured an attack and ended up near death on the front porch, yet was expected to have written the letter afterward. Did she miraculously have pen and paper on the porch, crafting a letter that conveniently cleared Gertrude of her wrongdoings? The inconsistencies deepened the mystery. Autopsy findings contradicted Gertrude's account. Sylvia's harrowing condition, marked by cuts, burns, bruises, and puncture wounds, spoke to prolonged abuse and malnutrition. Skeletal prominence, a yellowed liver, and damaged kidneys and brain revealed the extent of her suffering. The red and swollen state of her genitals pointed to brutal assaults, including the incident with the soda bottle. In light of these disparities, Sylvia's letter and Gertrude's narrative became increasingly questionable, leaving a disturbing gap between the supposed events and the harsh reality of Sylvia's autopsy. Sylvia's cause of death was determined to be a subdural hematoma resulting from severe head trauma. Upon learning what Jenny had to share about the tragic events, she was taken to her sister Diana's house while her parents were notified. The police acted swiftly, arresting Gertrude Baniszewski and her children Paula, Stephanie, and John Jr. Rick Hobbs and Coy Hubbard were also arrested. Faced with accusations, Gertrude immediately denied any involvement in Sylvia's abuse or death, attempting to shift blame onto her own daughter Paula. However, during the interrogation, Rick Hobbs provided a detailed account, exposing the grim truth behind Sylvia's torment and eventual demise. After Gertrude implicated Paula and Coy, Paula made a written confession, admitting to some of the abuse. Johnny also confessed to some abuse, implicating other neighborhood children. This led to the arrest of 4 more area youths who were investigated and later released. At 37 years old, Gertrude Baniszewski, along with 17-year-old Paula Baniszewski, 15-year-old Stephanie Baniszewski, 12-year-old John Baniszewski Jr., 15-year-old Coy Hubbard, and 15-year-old Richard Hobbs were all charged with first-degree murder for causing fatal injuries to Sylvia Likens with premeditated malice by striking, beating, kicking, and otherwise inflicting harm. During the trial, all the children involved in Sylvia's long-term abuse, as well as Jenny Likens, took the stand and testified about what they had witnessed. They all shared the same story of Gertrude regularly beating Sylvia with various instruments and instructing them to inflict horrific abuse on her. The medical examiner also testified about Sylvia's injuries, presenting a strong case for the prosecution. In a surprising turn during the defense's case, they called 11-year-old Mary Baniszewski as a witness. The prosecution had not been informed about this witness, and it was revealed that Marie had been left alone in her room with Gertrude before her testimony. A deputy sheriff noticed that every time Mary was asked a question, she looked to her mother for nods. Initially, the little girl claimed that her mother had never harmed Sylvia, except for punishment when she was bad, and that Gertrude had never locked Sylvia in the basement. However, during cross-examination, it didn't take long for Marie to admit the truth about what had happened in the home. She testified that she had seen her mother hit and burn Sylvia on multiple occasions. Gertrude Baniszewski was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Paula Baniszewski was convicted of second-degree murder and also received a life sentence. John Baniszewski Jr., Coy Hubbard, and Rick Hobbs were all found guilty of manslaughter, serving less than 2 years in a state reformatory. Stephanie Baniszewski was found not to have been involved in the injuries leading to Sylvia's death, and her charges were dropped. After the trial, Jenny went on to live with the case prosecutor and his family, including 2 daughters. However, in 1970, the Indiana Supreme Court ordered new trials for both Gertrude and Paula. Paula pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter at her new trial and was sentenced to 2 to 20 years in prison. Despite 2 unsuccessful escape attempts, she was released on parole in 1972. In 2012, it was revealed that Paula was working as a teacher's aide under the name Paula Pace. She worked for a high school counselor, but when the school received an anonymous tip about her true identity, Paula was fired for providing false information